Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent with me, Gbenga Aborowa. This is the program where we bring you up to date with all the security happenings on the African continent. But before we get into today's discussion, let's look at the top security headlines across Africa. Blast kills senior intelligence officer in southern Somalia. Gunmen kidnap Nigerian politician's wife and children. In Central Africa, more than 130 civilians executed by Congo rebels. And protesters in Sudan demand army leave power and reject deal. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, our focus is on the brokered ceasefire in Tigray, where warring parties in November agreed to a peace deal to put an end to its 2 years of devastating war. 1 month after the deal fostered by the African Union held in Pretoria, South Africa's capital, it's yet to be certain if this agreement will be honored in its entirety. We will analyze this today and propose solutions, but before then, let's bring you more updates in this report.
It's been 1 month since the landmark peace agreement between the Ethiopian government and Tigray's leaders was signed. The deal on November 2nd came as a huge relief and the second round of peace talks in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, days later signaled more hope for a new dawn for Ethiopia. A major component of that deal brokered by the African Union in Pretoria was the disarmament of Tigray's forces and the restoration of Ethiopia's federal government in the region. In exchange, the Ethiopian military would stop offensive targeting TPLF and restore essential services in the region. It also behoves the African Union and regional leaders to act against external interferences and ensure that this truce does not break down. Although fighting has since ceased, reports of continued abuse in Tigray by Eritrean troops who had been fighting alongside Ethiopian forces, as well as restricted access to aid, leave much to be desired. There is also the nostalgia of previous failed deals, which to a very large extent cast a shadow on the commitment of both parties to the Pretoria deal. While both sides need to honor their side of the deal, the role of Eritrea could also greatly undermine Ethiopia's truce with the TPLF. A mere truce may not be all the solution there is to the Ethiopia-Tigray conflict. The complementary steps in the coming days, or maybe months, will tell whether indeed we can say peace has finally been restored in the region, or it is just an agreement to buy time.
And more, I have live from Washington, D.C. in the United States of America, Meaza Gebremedhin. She's a human rights advocate. And also joining from Washington, D.C. in the United States of America, I have Simon Tesfaye, a founder of DW Network. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Secure the Continent. Now, I'd like to start with you, Meaza. It's been slightly over a month since the Pretoria peace deal was signed between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. What's your assessment of the truce, and has it been holding up so far?
The cessation of hostilities agreement was signed quite to the dismay of so many Tigrayans that have been fighting for their right to self-determination, their constitutional right for autonomy, and others. A lot of us were disappointed by the content of the agreement because it primarily or fundamentally doesn't answer the political and democratic questions that forced the people of Tigray to defend themselves against the genocidal war that was waged by the Ethiopian government. Nonetheless, we were thrilled that at least the people of Tigray, to a certain degree, would have a relief and that they would have access to humanitarian aid. However, the agreement is yet to be implemented, although leaders of the TPLF have been expressing their commitments, and they have been taking some steps that clearly show their commitment to upholding what they agreed to. But the other parties to the agreement, primarily the Ethiopian government, is yet to materialize some of the promises that its delegates made, primarily reconnecting Tigray to the rest of the world by reinstating hydroelectric power and internet is yet to be seen. At the same time, the people of Tigray still haven't had access to the much needed humanitarian aid that was supposed to start materializing right after the signing of the agreement. And like your colleagues hinted at the beginning of the show, Eritrea and Amhara forces are still deep in Tigray, committing all sorts of war crimes against the people of Tigray by illegally and unconstitutionally annexing parts of the region. And so while we're hopeful that the agreement will materialize and that the people of Tigray would get a break, but what we're seeing on the ground doesn't really show the true commitment of the Ethiopian government, not only to provide humanitarian corridor, but also to hold the Amhara forces as well as the Eritrean forces accountable and force them to leave from parts of Tigray.
Now, Meaza, before I move to Simon, aren't you happy, or don't you see a positive side in it, that we are not seeing exchange of fire and that women and children will not be dying on the scale in which they were dying before the cessation of hostilities? What positives do you see in the past 1 month? What positives have you seen?
I am thrilled that the people of Tigray have gotten a relief to a degree. I'm glad that the guns have been silenced to an extent. However, it's important to remember that pretty much most parts of Tigray are still under the illegal occupation of the invading forces, particularly the Amhara forces and Eritrean. And so people in those parts of Tigray are still dying. They're still suffering from the heinous crimes that have been committed against the rest of Tigray for the past 2 years. And so unless we're only talking about specific areas in Tigray, majority of Tigrayans are still under the occupation of Eritrea and Amhara, facing all sorts of crimes, including raping, mass shooting, and killing. So despite the fact that guns have been silenced to a certain degree, but there are still millions that are suffering under the brutality of Eritrean as well as Amhara forces.
Thank you, Meaza. The World Health Organization's Emergencies Director recently said the United Nations body still does not have unfettered access to Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. That was a condition of a truce signed last month. Simon, before I come to you, let's take a listen to what the WHO Emergencies Director had to say.
That peace process has not yet resulted in the kinds of full access, unfettered access, and in the massive scale-up of medical and health assistance that the people of Tigray need.
We welcome peace. The agreement is important, and I hope all parties will continue to commit to peace. And at the same time, the agreement should be implemented in full. And as Mike said, of course, there are some food aid and medicine being delivered, but unfettered access is what we expect, because the need is massive. Even when there is conflict, even in the middle of war, food aid and medical supplies should be delivered, and it should not be even a condition, and should not be attached with the political.
Now, Simon, we had Dr. Michael Ryan there and Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. So what is the problem? That was 7 days ago. Has anything changed since they made that statement? And why can't aid workers access the whole region? Unfettered access was what was signed in Pretoria, but we're not seeing that 1 month after.
That's a very good question, and it says a lot about what this peace agreement stands for. From what we heard in the past and what's happening right now, as far as I know, and as far as I heard, there has not been any humanitarian relief or unfettered humanitarian access to Tigray so far. And it says a lot in regards to what the peace agreement stands for. It seems like the peace agreement prioritizes disarming and silencing Tigray and kind of paralyzing the ability of the Tigrayans to fight back and even be voice for our people as well. Even as an advocacy worker, it has hindered our ability to say things about what's going on in Tigray, and it seems like it's prioritizing those facts that to enable and to kind of make the things that are happening in Tigray happen as they are without voices being echoed. So it prioritizes those facts.
What is the reason? Why is the WHO, what reason is the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan authorities given for the lack of unfettered access to food and aid?
There's no reason. There's excuses, but there's no reason. There's no reason.
Okay. What are some of the excuses?
I mean, the government is not being clear as well. They're saying there needs to be some works to be done through like groundworks in terms of like controlling airports, taking over civil aviations and the likes. But aid works and aid equipments and others usually are not coming from airports. They're transported using vehicles. And giving access to those shouldn't take this long. It has been over 33 days. And if you look at the peace agreement, it seems to prioritize, when you look at how it has addressed the issue of disarming PDF and how it has put in timeline to it, and you compare it to, the timelines for, aid works and emergency relief to come into Tigray, it hasn't prioritized that. It has put in dates. It specifically states how the disarmament would happen, but it doesn't specifically state how food aids and humanitarian aids would arrive to Tigray.
And there's no timeline to it too.
Exactly. So it says a lot to what it prioritizes rather than, again, as I said earlier, it prioritizes disarming and paralyzing Tigrayans rather than addressing, the core issues, which are humanitarian relief and humanitarian aid coming to Tigray.
Thank you, Simon. Now, Meaza, a few weeks before the signing of the Pretoria deal, I had the opportunity to speak with the African Union Special Envoy, Nigeria's former President, Olusegun Obasanjo, and I'd asked him about the situation in Tigray and what it will take to bring about lasting peace. Let's listen to his response. You're the representative of the chairperson of the African Union Commission for the Horn of Africa. The war in Tigray has been ravaging for 2 years with devastating consequences. In your opinion, what will it take to bring about lasting peace to the whole of Ethiopia?
Briefly, I would just say on Ethiopia that I believe the people also want peace. I believe the AU has taken the right step. I believe that in a situation where trust and confidence have been shattered, you need to start the process of confidence building. Confidence building in such a way, you start something that can show that, okay,
making progress.
You are making progress, because nothing succeeds like success itself. And I believe that once that begins, then you can take one step, short step, and make it longer and longer. And once you build that confidence, communication will start being restored within the entire nation. And then you can talk, you can dialogue, you can debate, you can converse, and you can give and take.
Meaza, former President Obasanjo did talk about confidence-building measures. Both parties took these measures that eventually led to the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, but Eritrea wasn't part of it. In hindsight, should Eritrea have been a part of this peace process?
Not at all. What should have happened to Eritrea is Obasanjo and others that were involved in this shuttle diplomacy should have had the political commitment and the kind of leadership that's necessary for them to call out Eritrea for its genocidal intervention into the Tigray genocide. What His Excellency Mr. Obasanjo and others did is laid the ground for Eritrea to hide behind the curtains of other actors. So, but it's not really, the question shouldn't be, should we have had Eritrea be a part of this negotiation? It's rather what should have the African Union and other involved or concerned stakeholders.
So why didn't you, I'm sorry to butt in here, but why didn't the TPLF representatives in Pretoria raise this? And how did they sign on to a text that did not address Eritrea for what they were doing?
Surely, I'm not here to defend or to speak on behalf of the TPLF delegation, but as a Tigrayan advocate and as a Tigrayan intellectual, I simply know for a fact that Eritrea should have been called out for its involvement in the Tigray genocide. And it's my hope that they might have tried, but surely the Ethiopian government is not willing to officially announce or recognize that they have invited a foreign enemy, a foreign nemesis, into supporting their genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray. And so Obasanjo and others that were involved in the shuttle diplomacy have given in to the demands, the unreasonable and uncalled for demands of the Ethiopian government to hide its partner in crime. And that's what they did. And the impact of such kind of agreement is far-reaching, actually. The impact of letting Eritrea get away with this kind of genocidal crime would start to reach not only the people of Tigray, but the people in the Horn of Africa. Because as far as I'm concerned, Eritrea has been known for one thing, and that is for causing havoc and destruction all across the Horn of Africa. We know how Eritrea has been behind the uprising and the instability in Sudan, the same thing in Djibouti, in Yemen, and other countries that it's not even limited only to the Horn of Africa. So anyone that is committed to seeing a stable and peaceful Horn of Africa should have the guts and the political commitment to call Eritrea for its destructive role in the Horn of Africa and put an end to it. But unfortunately, we have intergovernmental institutions such as the African Union and governments such as that of Abiy Ahmed that are willing to give diplomatic coverage for the Eritrean dictatorship so long as they're free to commit genocidal war against ethnic minorities, including the people of Tigray.
Thank you, Meaza. Now, Simon, still on the subject of Eritrean presence in Ethiopia, residents and aid workers, and I mean, the Washington Post actually did an article on this recently, say Ethiopia's Eritrean allies are also looting towns, arresting and killing civilians, and relocating thousands of people from a disputed part of Tigray. Despite this peace pact, what's the current situation of things with the Eritrean forces, and what will it take to get them out of Tigray?
So when it comes to Eritrean troops and the atrocities that they're committing, it has not stopped for a second. They've been killing, they've been looting, they've been massacring innocent civilians throughout Tigray, especially on the places that they occupy right now. And again, as I said earlier, this peace agreement does not address the core issue of this conflict. It just addresses some portion of it. And it looks like the peace agreement is more of a temporary relief than a permanent solution to the conflict that Tigray is having. And it says a lot in regards to what this peace agreement stands for. Going back to your question, the only solution is the agreement itself has to be reassessed. It has not addressed the aggressors. It has addressed the defenders, Tigrayans, and how they will disarm within Tigray. But it has not addressed how, when, and how fast these aggressors, the Amhara Fanos, this terrorist group that is massacring and killing innocent Tigrayans throughout Tigray. The same thing with the Eritrean troops. These are aggressors. These are terrorist organizations and states that have chosen to aggress and, take over part of Tigray and have committed millions at a minimum of atrocities. When I say millions, not in terms of casualties, but the act that has been committed, starting from rape, looting, killing, cleansing, anything that you can imagine has been committed in Tigray. So when this peace agreement was addressing the issues, I don't understand and how it was overseen. The primary issue in this conflict is there are aggressors, and those aggressors have not been addressed in this peace agreement. And when it comes to the negotiators, both parties have failed, the mediators and the negotiators, including the government of Tigray, in addressing these primary issues.
Thank you, Simon. Now, Meaza, back to the AU representative, chief envoy to the Horn of Africa, former Nigerian President Obasanjo. He visited Mekelle recently, the capital of Tigray, and he told the leadership of the regional states that no country should accept the presence of another foreign country on its land. So the big issue is, and the big question is this: what are they going to do about this Eritrean problem, and what are the consequences of having Eritrean forces who are not respecting the truce continue what they're doing in Tigray?
Well, there are multiple things both the leadership in Tigray and Mr. Obasanjo as a member of the peace panel could have done and should do. For example, both His Excellency Mr. Obasanjo could have pushed for the open calling out of Eritrea for its involvement during the peace talks in Pretoria as well as in Nairobi. At the same time, the Tigray leadership, for reasons that are not clear to most of us, is not issuing official statements. They're not, of course, there are some interviews here and there calling out Eritrea's involvement and still demanding its withdrawal. However, there are so many other things that could be done if the African Union and those involved in this peace brokerage were to have the commitment. For example, the AU could clearly call out Eritrea for its involvement in the Tigray genocide and could refer it to the UN Security Council. The A3 countries could still bring the issue of Eritrea's involvement to the UN Security Council attention, so that the principle of collective action could be invoked against Eritrea. But for all of this to happen, there needs to be political commitment to truly hold Isaias Afwerki and his dictatorial regime accountable, not only for the crimes committed prior to signing of these agreements, but also for the crimes that have continued to be committed after the signing of this agreement. However, the people of Tigray have been left alone with their arms silenced, and they're not able to defend themselves. We know in Aksum, Adwa, and Shira, and other parts of Tigray, Eritreans are still killing innocent people, particularly innocent people that are potentially suspected of having the capacity to rebuild Tigray, especially mothers that can continue the ethnic line of Tigrayans are still being attacked. They're being killed. And we should also not forget the fact that Europe, an ethnic minority that is closer to Eritrea and it is found in Tigray, has been under the complete occupation of the Eritrean forces since the beginning of this war. And with the fact that their numbers are very small, they face real threat of extinction. But no one is talking about these issues. And I think it's upon everyone to really ensure that the Eritrea's destructive role in the Tigray genocide continues to be the focus of our discussion, and that we push all involved actors, including the UN, including the AU special envoy, to do everything in their power to ensure that Ethiopian government officially recognize that Eritrea is deep in Tigray, committing all sorts of crime, and that it needs to leave. As long as this is not done, I don't think we'll be able to see any progress.
Thank you, Meaza. Now, Simon, still following up on the confidence-building measures that former President Obasanjo said. General Tadesse Werede, Commander-in-Chief of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, said that 65% of its forces had been pulled back, with some staying in case of further hostilities. How important and significant is this step?
I think that's like, the biggest thing that Tigray can offer is, moving troops out of the conflict zone and vacating those areas. That's, the biggest thing that can be offered as a confidence building measure. Even though that was not how it was supposed to happen, before troops being mobilized in terms of retreating or being moved out of the conflict zone, other confidence building mechanisms should have been done, like, access in terms of humanitarian aid. That should have been a priority. Release being sent to Tigray, that should have been a priority. Restoring basic necessities like telecommunication, banking, water supply, and electricity. This should have been done prior to that. But it shows and tells a lot in regards to Tigray priority and how Tigray has prioritized and has given all it has to uphold this peace agreement.
Thank you, Simon. Now, Meaza, in previous peace deals that have been signed and broke down, we didn't have a committee chaired by the AU to monitor, verify, and implement this agreement. How much of a difference will this make in preventing a resumption of hostilities? Does it change the dynamics this time around?
Unfortunately, it's my opinion that having an African led or African predominantly controlled by the African leaders peace committee is playing to the advantage of the aggressors. It's playing to the advantage of the genocidal actors, because this African led committee haven't had the commitment to hold the genocidal actors accountable, and so they're depending or they're counting on that flexibility, on that softness to continue committing war crimes in Tigray and to continue not to uphold at least some of the promises that they have made. And so although I'm very happy to see the empowerment of African leaders and to see African leaders trying to resolve African conflicts, unfortunately, if these leaders don't have the political commitment and the necessary material as well as expertise at their disposal, I don't know how successful they will be in terms of averting genocides that might occur elsewhere in Africa or rendering justice to those who have sustained genocide like the people of Tigray. And so it's very hard for me to be optimistic seeing how ineffective and unable they have been not only to avert the Tigray genocide but also to stop it in 2 years of time.
Okay, thank you. Fine place to go on a break. You're watching Secure the Continent here on News Central Television. When we return, we'll be looking at the restoration of electricity. Some good news for those in Mekelle and different parts of Tigray. After 2 years, the Ethiopian state media reported that power has been restored, and also permanent solutions to ending this conflict. Do stay with us. You're watching Secure the Continent on News Central Television.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
You're welcome back to Secure the Continent here on News Central Television. If you're just joining us, we've been discussing the Pretoria truce that ended hostilities between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government. It's been 1 month since that agreement was signed in Pretoria, South Africa. How is the truce holding up? These are the issues we're discussing tonight on Secure the Continent. I still have with me Meaza, Gebremedhin, and Simon Tesfaye, both joining live from Washington, D.C. in the United States of America. Now, Meaza, Ethiopian state media reported earlier this week that power had been restored to the capital of Tigray, Mekelle, after a 2-year blackout. Has this been confirmed and verified, and how important is this?
We have heard tweets from some members of the Tigray leadership that there is progress with regards to connecting Tigray with the national grid. However, we still don't know which cities across Tigray have been able to have access to power, which haven't. But I think the fundamental issue that we need to underline here is the issue isn't really whether humanitarian aid is trickling or whether some parts of Tigray has been reconnected to the power grid or not. The issue
but these are important steps, milestones. It's been 2 years of blackout, and you finally have electricity. Isn't it noteworthy?
It is indeed noteworthy. It's noteworthy, and it's good that such kind of steps are being taken. However, we have to remember the fact that these are human rights. These are rights that people shouldn't have been denied of to begin with from the very beginning. And at the same time, excuse me.
Sorry.
Me.
Are you fine now?
Yes, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
And I think it's important to remember that significant part of Tigray, majority parts of Tigray, are still under the illegal occupation of the Eritrean as well as the Amhara forces. And so you can reconnect parts of Tigray, for example, Maqala, Alamat, or others. But if you still have a significant number of soldiers committing war crimes across Tigray, and as a federal government, you don't have the guts nor the political commitment to call out these actors and ensure that they don't continue to invade parts of Tigray, then I don't know what good reconnecting parts of Tigray to the hydro power would mean. Surely it would serve a propaganda, it would serve a PR advantage for the Ethiopian government, but that shouldn't really hide the fact that there are still belligerent actors deep in Tigray committing all sorts of crime that, according to the agreement, should have been stopped by now. So while I appreciate that the people of Tigray, particularly those in Maqala and others, might have access to power after 2 years of darkness, I am still very much concerned that majority Tigrayans are still under the dark, receiving heinous crimes.
Thank you, Meaza. Now, Simon, the United Nations recently hosted in Addis Ababa the 17th Internet Governance Forum under the overarching theme of resilient internet for shared, sustainable and common future. A lot of people raised eyebrows there. How do you host in a country that has deprived the people of Tigray access to the internet? What's the current situation with the internet service in Tigray? Has it been restored? What do you make of Addis Ababa hosting the United Nations conference on internet in Addis Ababa? You might, okay. I can hear you now.
Perfect. So it is a mockery for Tigrayan people, the fact that Ethiopia was allowed to host that event. And another thing is, again, let's track back and talk about the power grid being reconnected to Tigray. Why not telecommunication? Why not phone services? It says a lot again, and it tracks back to the peace agreement as well. How it has failed fundamentally in terms of rectifying the primary issues in this conflict. It doesn't address accountability by any means. And the reason I'm saying this is, when the power has been reconnected to the national grid, to the federal grid, the Ethiopian government, in other words, is admitting to withholding and seizing Tigrayan and putting him in the dark for the past 2 years. So this is, by definition, admittance of war crimes, using basic necessities to besiege innocent civilians. And same can be said about telecommunication. I feel like restoring telecommunication should be the easiest thing to do, the simplest thing to do, reconnecting innocent civilians that have been disconnected from their parents and family for the past 2 years. Imagine that. But they have prioritized in terms of disarming weapons, disarming capabilities and abilities to defend oneself, something that can take up to 2-3 years. But reconnecting, restoring basic necessities like telecommunications should have been an issue of 2-3 days. Forget 34-35 days. So the event that was held in Addis is a mockery to us Tigrayans. It was laughing in our face, saying, "Hey, we know what's going on. We know, even in terms of, ask the questions that needs to be asked by the negotiators and the mediators. Total mockery for me."
Thank you, Simon. Now, Meaza, you mentioned Amhara forces being quite disruptive in Tigray. Who are they? Under whose command are they fighting? And does this peace agreement cover their activities?
Surely, the Special Amhara forces are they are of an Amhara ethnicity. They're expansionist and extremist terrorist groups that have been ravaging across Tigray since the beginning of the Tigray genocide, and they are under the direct command of the Amhara regional government, as well as the belligerent terrorist organization called FANO. And since we're still talking about a region that is within the federal framework of the Ethiopian state, the federal government also has a say over what happens with these actors. And so they are one controlled and under the direct direction of the regional government as well as the federal government. And so both governments have the responsibility to ensure that these forces are withdrawn from Tigray and that they don't continue to commit war crimes against the people of Tigray, and that they are held accountable for the crimes that they have committed thus far.
Thank you, Meaza. Now, Simon, we've seen the restoration of power, and it's just 1 month since the truce was signed in Pretoria. Do you think the Ethiopian government will now allow the international press to go in and monitor and speak? I would love to visit Mekelle. I would love to visit Tigray and see things myself, because this would help its confidence building measures that, look, we're making progress. Do you see this happening anytime soon? And why is it important for the world press to go to Tigray and see what's happening?
In my opinion, I don't see that happening, not at least in anytime soon. Forget about Tigray. I don't think an independent journalist would freely cover in Addis Ababa as well. I don't think News Central TV would have free access to Addis to cover anything that has to do with Tigray. So
why would you say so? Is the government hiding something? And I mean, it's our responsibility to tell the story as it is.
Yes, and that's why it's clear that they're hiding something, right? The atrocities that have happened in Tigray are crimes against humanity that have been committed for the past 2 years. And there's a lot to be covered, a lot. And they don't want that to come out to the public. That's why they have Tigray besieged. That's why they're not going to allow, forget independent journalists and news agencies. They're not going to allow domestic news agencies to go to Tigray and cover those atrocities. They're not going to allow it. They've been lying. They've said, "Oh, we have not disconnected Tigray from the national grid." They've said we have not disconnected Tigray from telecommunication and phone infrastructures, but they're now admitting to it. How would a given government allow an independent journalist to expose themselves? This government has committed crime that could put them in front of international crime court. So they're not going to allow no independent, no international journalists to go to Tigray and cover. Look what's happening in Addis. Look what happened to Reuters, Associated Press, and the likes. They've been denied coverage. Their license has been revoked for simply talking about Tigray. In Addis, not in Tigray, in Addis. Now put that into how that will translate when it goes to traveling to Tigray and covering. Not going to happen.
Okay. Meaza, this is not the first time a ceasefire will be signed by both parties. But looking at what happened in Pretoria and that there's a mechanism to monitor and, follow through the agreements, is there enough trust between both sides today that could make the ceasefire last and bring about this lasting peace that everyone wants? And what needs to be done if you feel there's not enough trust?
I don't think there is enough trust when it comes to the Ethiopian regime, particularly because of its action and inactions. But that can be changed. That can be changed if the Ethiopian government has the political commitment to call upon Eritrea to withdraw its forces from all parts of Tigray, to call upon the Amhara Fano terrorist group, as well as the expansionists and the special forces that are still deep in Tigray committing crimes, to withdraw their forces and to ensure that the Tigrayan territorial integrity is respected, and also to provide unfettered and unrestricted humanitarian corridor to all aid agencies and to reconnect Tigray. Not only parts of Tigray, but all parts of Tigray needs to be reconnected. People need to have access to their bank accounts. People that are still languishing in different interim camps across Ethiopia need to be freed, and those whose properties have been destroyed and confiscated by the federal government need to have their reports returned back to them. So if these steps are taken, maybe then there could be confidence that will be built around the Ethiopian government, and there could be a chance at seeing a lasting peace. Nonetheless, even after all of this is done, there still needs to be an agreement as to what the state building process needs to look like, because at the core of this genocidal war is Abiy Ahmed's unrelenting desire to have a unitary state that doesn't recognize the nation and nationalist rights, self-autonomy. The people of Tigray's constitutional and democratic rights, self-determination needs to be respected, whether this agreement is upheld or not. So the fundamental thing here is that to ensure the people's choices and voices are respected, and that there is a mechanism through which people can get some sort of justice for the crimes that they have sustained. For example, we know for a fact that over 120,000 Tigrayan women and young girls have been exposed to conflict-related or weaponized sexual violence. And according to this agreement, it is incumbent upon the Ethiopian judiciary system that has felt and sustained their suffering to ensure that they get justice. But this is not going to happen, because we know the judiciary system is fully controlled by the Ethiopian government, and that it has been instrumental in hiding the suffering of the Tigrayan women. And so if the Ethiopian government is truly committed to seeing a lasting peace in the region, and not only in Ethiopia, but the Horn of Africa generally, they have to agree to having countries with universal jurisdiction to adjudicate these cases and to ensure that survivors of the Tigray genocide have their chance at court. Unless this happens, I'm afraid we will risk a relapsing of status quo and going back to another bloodshed. And we also have to remember that the issue in Ethiopia isn't really in Tigray. Almost Ethiopia is having conflicts after another everywhere. Like just recently in Oromia, we have seen how they have beheaded two individuals, and they were parading with the heads on the street. So you have a community or society that has been emboldened to commit such kind of heinous crimes. And I think it's a matter of time that all Ethiopians come to terms with this fact and try to find solution, not only by pushing the Ethiopian government to end its genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray, but also to have a regime change in the country so that the people could have a chance in really resolving their internal conflicts by themselves.
Thank you, Meaza, and I'm happy you brought up the theme of justice, because the United Nations in the past have reported that both sides committed war crimes in this conflict. So will there be justice for the crimes that happened during the war, Simon, or does signing the truce mean that all sins have been forgiven? We start from a clean slate.
That's what it looks like. It looks like the peace agreement is being used as a getaway free card. So it's the peace treaty by itself does not address accountability. And in my opinion, for peace to last permanently and to have longevity it should address accountability. Those who have committed atrocities should be brought to justice. And it goes on both parties. So the fact that the agreement itself does not address accountability, doesn't state how those who have gone through pain and agony are going to be repent, is a failure by itself. And it says a lot, again, in regards to what the peace agreement stands for. So, again, in my opinion, the peace agreement should prioritize accountability in addition to humanitarian aid and the likes, instead of prioritizing disarming and disabling Tigrayans' one's ability to defend themselves. So, and I've said this in the past, peace with zero accountability is going to create adversity, and a huge one as well.
Thank you.
Everybody has.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. I'll let you
everybody
finish your
have-
thought. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody has pain in their hearts, not just the Tigrayans. Every single person that has gone through any agony has pain in their hearts, and that's going to pass into generations. Might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but at some point, another civil war is going to break. And that's what happened in the past in Ethiopia. Look what's happening in Ethiopia. Barbarism, killing human beings, beheading innocent civilians is the norm. The reason behind it is because there's no accountability. Everything gets shredded as a reform. Somebody comes and they say, oh, what has happened in the past has happened. We're reforming, we're transforming, and it gets rubbed away. And that keeps birthing another pain, another injustice. And that, again, births another civil war and hate between one another. So the fact that there's no accountability addressed in this peace agreement says a lot about what this peace agreement stands for. It's a temporary relief, not a permanent solution to the conflict.
Thank you very much, Meaza Gebremedhin and Simon Tesfaye, for being a part of this very important discussion on the truce that was signed in Pretoria, South Africa.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.